Have you ever inexplicably lost time? You walk into a room, look at the clock, and you're sure it was 55 minutes earlier just a few moments ago when you looked. Or maybe you drove somewhere in too little time to be possible. Maybe you caught a glimpse of an event or location that doesn't fit into our timeline, like some kind of ghostly apparition of a past world that materialized right before your eyes. As crazy as it sounds, you're not alone. Bizarre time slips like these have been reported for hundreds of years, and they have overlaps that could clue us into the nature of time, space, and reality itself if we consider they could be real. In 2006, a 19-year-old named Sean was shoplifting in the Liverpool city center when he was spotted and chased down the street by a security guard. Sean dashed down Brooks Alley and expected the guard to come running around the corner behind him, but he never did. That's when the teenager noticed a sensation of tightness in his chest, and when he looked out at the street he'd just come from, he realized the pavement on the road looked unfamiliar. The vehicles were like nothing he'd ever seen before. All evidence of Liverpool's Big Dig construction was gone, and people were dressed really bizarrely. Now it was all of a sudden raining, too. Where'd that come from? Sean had nothing to do but wander around Bold Street shocked and growing anxious. I mean, wouldn't you? He took out a cell phone and couldn't get a signal. When he passed a newspaper stand on Ranelagh Street next to Central Station, he spotted the date Thursday, May 18th, 1967. Dude went back in time 39 years. Sean, of course, had a panic attack and ran back towards Brooks Alley. In his mind, he went over his own life. His parents had disowned him, and he'd taken up terrible things like shoplifting and drugs. But he had a few friends and desperately wanted to get home. Hurrying up the road, he suddenly found he got a signal back on his phone. The buildings and people ahead of him looked normal, but behind him, people were still dressed in the style of 1967. He was stuck between two worlds. Sean hurried forward, back to his own time, and finally hopped on a bus home. But how could we believe a criminal's time flip story? A journalist from Liverpool Echo reported she interviewed Sean 4 separate times, and he didn't change a single detail of his story. At all. The guard who chased him told the journalist that Sean literally vanished into thin air when he chased him down Brooks Alley, and his friend said he was badly shaken up by his experience. The journalist investigated Sean's descriptions of the Liverpool he'd encountered during his accidental trip to the past and confirmed they were all accurate. So I have to say, with multiple accounts of time slips happening in Liverpool, maybe there's really something going on there. That's right, I found more time slips in this exact area, plus many others of people accidentally jumping through time and space without even realizing it. Now, maybe you've heard about time slips before, but I guarantee that the bizarre connections between accounts that I found when I dug deeper will leave you genuinely wondering whether the space-time continuum has been breached via some shocking reasons that will become clear. Join me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's out of time. Have you ever heard of the time slips on Bold Street in Liverpool? You should have. I'll dive into the most famous account first. On a sunny day in July of 1996, an off-duty policeman, Frank, went shopping with his wife, Carol. Carol went to Dylan's bookshop on Bold Street, while Frank went to purchase a CD at HMV on Ranelagh Street. Frank bumped into a friend, had a chat, and then about 20 minutes later, he strolled back to Bold Street to meet his wife. As he walked up the incline from the Central Station, though, he noticed an unusual quietness. The street was cobbled where it just wasn't before. And instead of modern clothes, people all wore clothes from the 1950s, 40 years out of style. Frank was startled by a loud, janky 50s horn. A box van with the name Kaplan's on its side sped by, just missing him. Crossing the road, Frank saw that in place of Dylan's bookshop was a large store with the name Cripps over the entrance, with a window displaying women's handbags and shoes. Where the heck was his wife? Why had he suddenly stepped back in time to the 50s? Would he be stuck here forever and have to live through Beatlemania, nuclear war fears, and the early days before the World Wide Web all over again? Frank became pretty relieved when he saw a young woman dressed in 90s clothes, hipster jeans, and a sleeveless top. She carried a bag branded Miss Selfridge, a store that wasn't in Liverpool in the 1950s, and the modern-looking girl looked just as baffled as he felt as she entered Cripps. But suddenly, the whole scene reverted back to 1996 like that. Frank asked the young woman if she'd seen the same thing he had. She seemed frightened and confirmed that she had, so these two were time slipping together. Now, there are multiple versions of this encounter out there with some slight differences in details, but later it was found that a woman's outfitters called Cripps had indeed stood on the site of Dylan's in the 1950s, and a company called Kaplan's had been based in Liverpool just like he'd seen on the side of the van. Locals apparently all know this story, and there are similar modern Liverpool time slips going around of some girls being transported back in time without warning as well. Some chalk it up to drunk people forgetting their reality after visiting the pub, or clout chasers making up stories. But that's not the bizarre part. The bizarre part is the explanation they've come up with for why this could really be happening. Now stay with me. Underneath Liverpool is a railway system with several stops, and it's been theorized that something about it is causing time warps. In fact, that shoplifter, Sean's time slip case happened in Brooks Alley right around the corner from Central Station, and presumably right above the railway system. Some Reddit users have reported they could smell a weird kind of burning coming from the tracks that made them feel fuzzy and kind of strange. Could something about the railway's construction be warping time? Here's what I found. An electromagnetic field is an invisible energy in a region of space and time that changes depending on the electric and magnetic effects of electric charges. So anywhere can be a combo of electric and magnetic fields, but the relationship between them can cause disturbances between them that are called electromagnetic waves. That's pretty well known, common science, and we see examples of this in microwave ovens, visible light, radio waves, compass showing Earth's magnetic field, your cell phone, Wi-Fi power lines, and computers that all generate or are examples of electromagnetic fields. Could something about the railway in Liverpool be generating electromagnetic fields that somehow affect time? Probably if we asked Nikola Tesla, then yes. Now, we can only see the effects on objects by looking at them and in what we see in the space physically around us. But what if these time warps are common here in Liverpool because portals are a natural reaction to the physical materials in that spot? Now, I have some more theories about what's happening that I'll get to soon. But first, let's dive into a paranormal time slip that lasted a lot longer than Sean's or Frank's, and that had corroboration that the experiencers couldn't have known before going through their time slip. In August of 1901, on the grounds of one of the most famous buildings in France, Charlotte Anne Elizabeth Moberly and Eleanor Frances Jourdain experienced a time slip. It was a beautiful day at Versailles for them to walk around and get acquainted. They'd be working together soon, so they had to make a bunch of small talk, which we all know is super fun. Because they didn't know the path around the grounds, they were relieved to find two dignified-looking men they assumed were gardeners dressed in green coats and three-cornered hats carrying spades. All right, this is already getting a little weird. The clothes were bizarre, but they kept walking in the direction the men politely indicated. A sudden depression, like an inexplicable growing distress, separately came over each woman, and they found themselves walking in front of a small circular garden kiosk overshadowed by trees. Miss Moberly reported, "Everything suddenly looked unnatural, therefore unpleasant. Even the trees behind the building seemed to have become flat and lifeless, like a wood worked in tapestry. There were no effects of light and shade, and no wind stirred the trees. It was all intensely still." A man was sitting close to the kiosk with a cloak on and a large hat, staring at them with an alarming and repulsive expression. As Miss Moberly started to panic, a curly-haired man with dark eyes interrupted by running up in a sweat and urging them on their way in French. He indicated they should go to the right up ahead, so they walked towards a little bridge. When they turned around to thank him, they were shocked that he disappeared. The women passed over the bridge and came upon a little house where a lady was sitting on the terrace sketching. The woman had a shady white hat and fair hair, and she was wearing a specific kind of old-fashioned, unusual dress that caught their attention. Miss Moberly said, "I was beginning to feel as though we were walking in a dream. The stillness and oppressiveness were so unnatural." Finally, they made their way back to the main part of the grounds where reality kicked back in. Now, the women, of course, weren't really talking to one another very much. They were pretty freaked out, and for a whole week, they wouldn't speak about what happened that afternoon, until Miss Moberly was trying to write a letter with some of the details of their trip the week before. As the scenes came back to her one by one, the unnatural feeling came back so strongly too that Moberly finally asked Jourdain if she thought the place were haunted. They decided to each separately write down an account of what they'd experienced so they could compare in true scientific fashion. Days later, they wrote down fuller accounts to their friends. So why did they conclude they'd experienced a time slip? Well, they didn't, until they began to research further. Their only clues were that the grounds were strange only in the areas they'd felt these odd sensations, and the people were strangely dressed only in those areas as well. Now, maybe you're thinking they just stumbled upon some French Revolution reenactments or read up on some French history. Well, check this out. Now, these two women were employed by Oxford, so we're not talking about stupid people here. For years after their time slip, the women researched the history of the Versailles grounds, going to find old blueprints and historical records that hadn't seen the light of day in years. First, they uncovered that some of the different scenery they'd encountered had changed over 100 years back. It didn't exist in the present. Some of it had only existed for 16 or 17 years total, created by Marie Antoinette and destroyed immediately after her death. In fact, thinking about that sketching woman they'd thought looked exceptionally lonely, and the silence of the place, and her dress, they'd wondered if it had been Marie Antoinette herself they'd come across. Think that's impossible? Moberly and Jourdain discovered that the outfits the people around them were wearing were from 1789, specifically the morning dress people wore back then. But they'd never seen them exactly portrayed in any pictures of costumes of that period. In the years to come, many wondered if these ladies just waited a while to make up their story more fully before coming to the public. But that wouldn't explain why their friends all heard about it right away. It also wouldn't explain why after publishing their story, they never brought up their experiences to anyone unless they explicitly asked. In fact, many who saw them in the years after the story came out never heard them mention it at all. Could this have been a historical reenactment they stumbled upon, or even actors in costumes? The women talked to the authorities at Versailles and learned that nothing like that had happened during the time they were there. Municipal records showed other times when actors had been in the area, but not during their trip either. Debunks published at the time got many details wrong, like claiming a film was being made at the same time while the year was entirely different, or other inaccuracies. Could the woman have been asleep or in a trance? Their book stated unequivocally that they were fully awake and even greatly surprised by what was going on because it was too natural. Could they have looked up these historical facts before visiting? I mean, that'd be shockingly dorky to do. Neither had been particularly interested in the period of French history before visiting, and were only there so that they could get to know each other better as coworkers. Some details weren't even discovered until years later when they dug up old records and maps proving there was a kiosk on the grounds at the time and a bridge in that location. Nobody even knew that they'd existed before they saw it with their own eyes. So what really happened to Miss Moberly and Miss Jourdain? I'd be willing to brush off this one case that even the Versailles website has up for anyone to read, but there's more. I wanted to dive into some of the most interesting time warp stories I found while researching, including some submitted by you after watching our other metaphysical episodes where accidental time travel was really achieved. See if yours made the list. A Reddit user reported that one day he completely slept through his alarm. He lived in the countryside at the time, so it was usually an hour to an hour and a half commute to work, depending on traffic. He woke up only 10 minutes before the time he usually left and got ready quickly, but he still left about 20 minutes late. Somehow, though, the man got to work 10 minutes early. He'd cut his previous shortest driving time of 55 minutes in half. Now, he said most of his commute was side streets and it was about 35 miles each way. So he calculated he'd have to clock around 60 miles per hour the entire 30 minutes he drove in order to manage that. He had no idea how it happened. Maybe he just looked at the time wrong before he left, right? Wrong. He texted his mom to confirm what time he left, and she couldn't believe it either when he arrived 10 minutes early after being 20 minutes late. Yeah, that's confusing. In my other Time Slips episode, Susan C. reported something similar. She regularly commutes from Forest Hill, California to Auburn. On the 18-mile stretch that typically takes about 25 minutes, sometimes it only takes 10 minutes. And she's not speeding. It happens so often, Susan narrowed down exactly on which stretch of road it takes place. And it happens when approaching from either direction. In 2006, another Reddit user experienced a time slip with a close friend in Toronto at the Hudson Bay department store. The store suddenly changed to the early 90s, the clothes sections, electronics department, everything. They ran to McDonald's and found the menu was old. Anyway, she said, "I can never forget the terrible feeling of being displaced. It was like being upside down on a roller coaster. It felt like hell if there was a hell, even though we both wouldn't normally be absolutely into such a reality. So was it a case of drunk kids? No, I mean, she was 7 months pregnant at the time and had experienced the time slip with a friend who had the same experience. It was real. A user named Ryan Hegseth8720 commented on my other time slips episode that he unexpectedly jumped in time 12 hours. He got home from work around 5 p.m. and watched about an hour and a half of Family Guy and then got a little confused. Why? It was weird that it was still light out at 7 p.m., but he suddenly realized it was 7 a.m. Wouldn't you have had to get up to use the bathroom or get a drink of water if you'd fallen asleep for 12 hours in a chair watching TV? Bizarrely, Ryan said that he found an account of someone else this happened to while they were also watching Family Guy, who lost 8 hours of time, and it was almost word for word how he described his own account. And this is proof that Seth MacFarlane has access to a time machine.
Great Scott!
I joke, but Ryan is not the only one to lose time. In my episode, Did the World End in 1999, Lee Davidson 1245 left this comment. A freak occurrence happened to me on New Year's 1999. I worked second shift and was so used to the routine, I didn't need an alarm clock. Home by 11:30 p.m., dinner, unwind, and a full 8 hours of sleep before waking up mid-morning, usually around 9 or 10 a.m. to be at work for my 2 to 10:30 p.m. shift. I was scheduled to work the 31st of December. I got home on the 30th, like usual, was in bed by 1 a.m., then slept until almost midnight on the 31st. Close to 24 hours of sleep without waking up, without hearing my phone next to my bed ringing when work kept calling, without hearing my roommate knock on my door to see if I was home, without going to the bathroom. The doctors I knew and worked with thought that was the strangest part. No bowel movements for that long. I mean, I wouldn't have made it that long. And then he said, for me, the strangest part was no dreams. I've always been a somewhat vivid dreamer, and even if the details slip my mind, I know when I dream. But that night, nothing. I've always wondered what happened, and this video may have shed new light on it. I mean, honestly, this is the thing I love most about the metaphysical show, is the comments are the funnest thing to look at. I always find the craziest things from you guys that you've experienced that either corroborate what we were talking about or add a whole new dimension to it. So keep commenting. It's awesome. Now, you guys might be wondering, well, Rob, what do you think about all this? Well, I actually think there might be more than one reason for a time slip. I actually don't think time exists the way we think it does. It could even exist all at once at all moments. And so, for example, when someone psychically or remotely views a past event without actually being there, from one perspective, you're simply delving into time to access something that has occurred or re-experiencing something that has occurred. Maybe when someone encounters a time slip, those timelines or realities are overlapping, or those people are accessing other times in those realities that are happening at the same time for us. If you get what I'm saying. It gets kind of trippy. But as I see it, there are three big reasons why someone experiences a time slip. 1, physical circumstances. Sometimes I think the environment can physically have an effect, like we enter an area of space where the conditions are just right to affect time and reality itself. Like the people who drive in the same places or walk in the same area and report similar time warps. Now, there could definitely be electromagnetic things going on accidentally too, or even on purpose, given all the weird experiments the governments of the world have been doing for years with particle accelerators and trying to access other dimensions, etc., etc. 2, opportunities for improvement. Other times, I think that time slips are basically a Back to the Future or Christmas Carol sort of scenario for the person experiencing it. In this case, Scrooge was leading a terrible life, treating people horribly and ruining his own future and afterlife by being like that. Some spirits then knocked some sense into him by showing him other realities where his life was headed and how he treated people. Marty McFly wasn't much better. Now, remember that teenager Sean who was shoplifting when he had his time slip experience? He could see his path ahead returned him to his own reality, but the path behind him that he was walking away from would have left him stuck in the past, literally. It's kind of hard to ignore that metaphor. That pregnant woman said her time slip felt like hell, and Miss Moberly's Versailles time slip left her feeling physically ill and alarmed. Why? Whether it's accidental or not, something as major as a time slip happening to you is a chance to look at your life and be grateful not to be stuck in the 50s or 60s. Or to unstick yourself from wherever you know deep down you're off. We're not just a product of our circumstances, but can make lots of choices that take us on different paths. Then if we stumble through a portal and really do get stuck in another time, space, or reality, we'll at least be wise enough to take it over with our knowledge of the future and maybe fix some of the problems headed our way before they ever happen. Or at least to look into them and consider that our reality is metaphysical in ways we just don't understand. 3. Time works differently in different time spaces. Now check this out. In a story left out of the Bible, but that's in the Ethiopian tradition, Abimelech fell into a divinely induced sleep for 66 years. When he woke up, he was next to a basket of figs that had been perfectly preserved. A similar story from Islam told of a man who slept for 100 years. This concept is in many other spiritual traditions as well. For example, in Hinduism, a king had a beautiful and talented daughter he worried about finding a proper husband for. He took his daughter to the home of the divinity Brahma and asked for help finding a suitor. They waited patiently, but when Brahma heard the king's story, he said, "The world that you knew from when you started your journey to meet me has long gone by. The people that you knew, the potential suitors you had in mind for your beloved daughter, have all died and passed away, and so have their sons and grandsons and their grandsons too." How could that have happened? Brahma went on. Time runs differently on different planes of existence. Roughly 115 million years had passed on Earth while the king and his daughter went to see Brahma. Brahma sent them back to Earth with arrangements for the daughter to marry. But the landscape, people, and everything had changed on Earth. 115 million years changed. Whether all the details of these stories are accurate or not, I agree that time probably runs differently on different planes of existence. Time doesn't pass the same for you and me on Earth as it does for an astronaut up in space or potentially for someone on the other side of the galaxy. Time also doesn't exist in the same way down on the plane of atoms and particles as it does here, or as it does for things the size of planets and stars. In this weird world we live in, occasionally stumbling through a time slip seems like it would just happen once in a while. Just look at all the accounts of people who've been through it themselves. But what do you think? Have you experienced an unexplainable time slip or time warp when you were clear-headed and knew that you were experiencing it? Let me know in the comments, and you just might make it into a future episode of Metaphysical like our users here. If you want to support my work and our small team of very ridiculously hard workers trying to beat an impossible algorithm, you can visit themetaphysical.tv, where you can get access to our catalog of over 1,000 curated videos on mysteries, metaphysical experiences, and more. If you like this show, remember to hit the like and subscribe button here on YouTube, because that impossible algorithm will know to push us out to more people. Thanks so much for watching, and with that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.